Thank you, Jürgen. So this was it from Deutsche Telekom as a presentation. Now we're actually going to jump into the panel discussion, and therefore I would like to invite our three experts on stage. Josef Brunner, take a seat. Martin Spindler and Florian Schumacher. Where I want you. Okay, thank you. So we actually have a couple of guests in the audience that just arrived, so they don't know you yet. I will give you a short introduction of who these men are. On the left or on the right from your side, we have Florian Schumacher. He's a trend scout for wearable technologies and founder of the Quantified Self group, which is like a meetup group with the locations Munich and Berlin. He has now more than 1,000 members that are meeting on a regular basis to actually exchange ideas in the quantified self field. Jürgen Hase, you already saw his keynote, so I think I don't need to mention any other words here. Josef Brunner, he's a serial entrepreneur. He founded his first startup when he was 16, and his last startup called Julex was sold to Cisco last year, and now he's actually in charge of the IoT unit at Cisco Systems. And last but not least, Martin Spindler on the left has a very deep knowledge of the smart home market as a consultant. He also worked for Nest Europe and runs the IoT meetup group in Berlin. So please give a warm welcome. So as you can see, it's a quite mixed panel. So we have Jürgen Hase, who represents the corporate view. We have Florian, who represents wearables as a track that we actually had today with our startups, but also with keynotes. The same for Josef. He more represents the B2B commercial applications view, and Martin obviously represents the smart home perspective here. So we're trying to get this panel into a direction where we kind of look at IoT from a broader perspective. So maybe to start the first question with, and I think this day is an ideal example of that. We can see that there's now a lot of buzz going on in the IoT market. Only when we send out the invites, we received actually massive responses. A lot of interest from investors, a lot of interest from corporates. So we were really surprised by that positive response, and this really shows that there's a serious development regarding this topic. If you look at that, you obviously have different players in the field. So one players are the startups that are moving fast, are innovative, they come up with really crazy and great ideas. And on the other hand side, you have the corporations. And those corporations that are moving into the IoT space are actually, more and more, they have deeper pockets to invest. So it's a whole different game, but they're also slower. So my first question that I would like to start with is, what do you think, who is going to lead the IoT innovation space, and how might this look like? Will it rather be some startups? Will it rather be some corporates? Or maybe there's also something in between? And I would pass this question to Josef, as you know both sides quite well.
Well, I'll answer with the founder's head. Is this on? I'll answer with the founder's head. So I think it will be the startups that win. I hope it will be the startups that win. And I think for a couple of reasons. So you mentioned the deep pockets versus pace. I think that's one important consideration. The second one is who owns the customers and who the customer is. I think that's another really important question. But at the end of the day, I think what makes the IoT convergence or wave really interesting is that it's completely solutions driven, right? So you have to bring together a lot of different, domain expertise, which is typically something that a big corporation struggles with because they're siloed, right? So if you look at a large infrastructure vendor, they're building switches, and they're building routing, they're building cloud business, and they're building software, but they struggle to bring this all together, and a startup can build a solution from scratch that contains everything on one side, but on the other side, everything is agnostic. So it's device agnostic, it's infrastructure layer agnostic, and I think that's the reason why a startup is in a better position partnering with these large infrastructure guys, but then be in the center of or be on the mind when it comes to the customers, and then really drive the opportunity. So I think it will be the startups.
So Jürgen?
No, I should say I have to disagree.
I was just about to ask Jürgen, so what do you think about this?
I do not agree on this, to be honest. I want to be really honest, because I believe it's you have to build up strong cooperation. I believe it's more a win-win situation. Lesson learned from our side the last 3 years was, I fully agree on your statement, the innovation is coming up from the startups. Fully agree. Absolutely, because they are high innovative on their ideas, on all the different layers. But if you have a look on the ecosystem, you have to build one picture from all the different types of puzzle. Nobody will buy one puzzle. That's the point. I believe the enterprise customer, especially, for them it's independent. They want to get a managed service, full secure, in a global way, and for this one you need all the different players. There are normally 1, 2, or 3 different startups you have to combine in an intelligent way. New for us was the last 2 years really how to interact with all these new startups. That's what we have done in an excellent way the last years, but it was new also for us. I believe there's not a winner, somebody who will win or somebody who will lose. You need the combination. Without the big players like Deutsche Telekom, it doesn't work in the same way. You need a combination of both. That's the reason I believe both sides will win.
Good point. So this actually also means we need more or less unified platforms, and we need standards. For me, it seems that there's a lot of fragmentation, and we're going to need standards. Is there already an opinion in the panel how these standards are going to look like, and who is actually going to define those standards? Maybe Florian, as you are dealing with so many different devices in your groups and in those trends that you're looking at, do you see any kind of trend there coming up?
So I think there are integrators which capture data from many different sources, and I mean it's not actually a standard they define, but for every third party it's a way to get access to many different tools, many different activity trackers using such an integrator, and then getting step count as a defined metric, for example, so you don't have to hassle with all the APIs. And on the other side, I'm also really interested what Apple is doing with Healthbook, so maybe this is a chance to define something in the health space.
You just mentioned Apple, so how do you see their position in the IoT space, since they're, like, in general quite aggressive in the last couple of years? So how will they continue that in that space, or will you continue that at all?
Yeah, so I strongly believe that Apple will bring up something really impressive. I mean, the pressure gets higher and higher because they are late in the smartwatch market with Android Wear being announced a few weeks ago, and Motorola working on a pretty awesome watch. But if you look at the hirings from Apple, with the CEO from Burberry, from Yves Saint Laurent, and with the technical developer from, I don't remember the name of the startup, but the startup with the micro needles which can dig into your bloodstream somehow. It digs into your fluids on the outer side of the skin, and then maybe measure your blood glucose level or things like that. I think Apple will continue to lead the wearable space in terms of digital health, whereas Google will continue to lead the space in terms of context and smart applications, but I think Apple will stay strong in health.
Okay, so you kind of see, for different segments, you see different existing incumbents that are going to be strong in that field. as from what I understand what you said. But still, to me, it sounds very sci-fi. Just thinking about the Band-Aid you put on your skin to measure your body activity and these kind of things. So this actually gets me back to my first sentence. So is IoT already here? Where in the curve are we? Is this something that is really a trend that we can already see in a relative enough size of consumers? And I think this is also something that regards smart home, because smart home is a big IoT topic, which has, I think, has a different adoption curve as wearables, where I can easily just buy a device, put it on my wrist and test it. I think the way to really try smart home devices is a different one. So I give this question to you, Martin. What's your opinion on that?
Just the other week, I read a funny quote again by Popular Mechanics from 1949 that talked about how in the future computers might actually weigh less than 1.5 tons. I think with IoT we're at a moment that I compare to how I imagine 1994 must have felt like. All the fundamentals moving in the right direction. We have Moore's law, computers get ever cheaper, and if you look how much you actually pay for a full-powered Linux PC nowadays, that's staggering. But then battery consumption gets better all the time, and when that comes along, we have a strong incentive to equip more stuff with smarts. So it's definitely out there. What happens right now, though, is that we haven't developed the right frame to think about it yet, I feel. It's like, that's why I say 1994, the web was 2 years old, we had the first browser, but it was generally still thought of as a better library, essentially. It was a better document access system, and the whole experimentation of what could the web be just started, right? And then, I mean, 10 years later, we have Facebook that basically came out of nowhere, just because we kind of found a use case for this crazy new tech. I think it's the same with IoT, especially in smart home right now. Wearables, we kind of got the market product fit somewhat already. We have all this crazy technological innovation where we haven't developed standards yet, which is hugely problematic. But we haven't really figured out a way to systematically go about how we actually might use that technology. And it's hard because we don't have the benefit of the doubt of, being small for now. Everybody's interested. You have the first, crazy multiple exits, which is good because, venture capitalists are finally starting to put money into the market and to actually fund a couple of startups that sound promising. However, they're under the limelight right now, and it's really hard for those guys to make any kind of mistakes, which are necessary to bring the whole market forward. In terms of standards, to come back to the previous question, I mean, that's been a crazy couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, I believe, there was this industry consortium for smart home standardization. Last week, Samsung came up. The Bosch and ABB consortium is still awaiting regulatory approval. So everybody wants to develop their standard, and it's only leading to more insulation and isolation. And I fear that on the overall scheme of things, we're right now heading in a situation which is comparable to, I don't know, there's the saying, printers and projectors never work, right? And we're right there right now, where you have plenty of startups that basically waste most of their time having to write drivers for different solutions just to integrate.
Thank you, Martin. You just mentioned the investor's point of view and actually the investment as such. We obviously look at a lot of IoT startups, and I'm always amazed that, most of them, it feels like, are raising their money on crowdfunding platforms. And this is an interesting development, and I believe this is specifically in Europe due to the fact that the investment behavior that you as an investor need for investing in a hardware startup is a completely different investing behavior than the one you would need in order to invest in a software startup. You just have higher risk, you need to invest more money in order to actually see a first product and test it. So I'm very curious how this investment structure, investment market is going to change, or will it actually change in Europe? So as someone who actually sold a couple of startups already and also has this deep understanding of the IoT market, do you think that hardware-driven IoT startups are going to kind of change the way investors act and change the investment market?
Well, I think it depends on what you consider being an IoT startup and what not. I mean, if you look at building management technologies, for example, not talking about smart home specifically, but just connecting your home, your building to IP. Is this IoT or is it just an IP-enabled building management system? I don't necessarily have the answer to this, but if you want to group investment decisions by the sector, then I could consider this being an IoT hardware startup, right? And we have seen a lot of investment there. The other one is smart grid. So if you look back 5 or 6 years ago, billions of dollars have went into the supply side of the house, smart grid, peak demand, and all these energy-focused business cases, and it all went down the drain basically, right? So there was a lot of investment. So I think it's how you group your startup. On the other side, I think I read an article 2 weeks ago that 1.3 billion have been invested in IoT startups last year by 10 VCs, including Kleiner Perkins and other really large ones. So I think it is happening. One of the things which is I think challenging is go-to-market customers and channels. So we talked about partnerships. That's I think critically important because you build solutions. So the go-to-market for IoT startups is I think something that investors are not really sure of. We have Nest as one exception, and I wouldn't take them as a poster child or a template. But I think if somebody figures out a really good go-to-market strategy, then I think investors would be more than willing to put a lot of capital into IoT startups, whether they are hardware centric or a combination of hardware and software, which I think most of the IoT startups really are. It's a combination of both. But I also agree that I think that's a different take here in Europe. It's very US-centric. There's also a lot of discussions in Asia, but the European market still seems to be, very, very conservative when it comes to investments into IoT startups. I think it's US-driven.
So you think European startups are going to address the American market to raise funds when they reach A round?
Well, I think there is no European startup anymore. I think they all should be global, right? So we're talking about cloud and cloud enablement. So I think per se every startup now has the advantage of being global from day one. My preference is always to start with the US Inc. because it's so much easier to raise capital because a lot of investors know how to invest in US Incs. It's easier to attract US-based employees because of stock option plans. All these things make it just easier if you don't want to have a lot of distraction with the company structure. But at the end of the day, whether you're a European startup or not, I think you should always try to be global from day one, which is sometimes challenging for German startups because their market is big enough to survive and to build a sustainable business. So sometimes they don't necessarily be global from day one, but the longer you wait, the more complex it becomes. So be global from day one.
I totally agree with